Season 2 of the Strange, Rare, and Peculiar podcast, a place to learn more about homeopathy, deepening your knowledge, expanding your universe of possibility in the world of health and well-being through homeopathy.
Homeo what?
Homeo what?
Morning.
Not wasting any time. Get right into it.
Good afternoon.
I'm late.
And good evening.
And all that.
You're not late.
I came running.
There's no such thing.
We've got a debacle on our hands.
A debacle?
There is a 2-week lag between the posting of podcasts because we ditched the last two.
Yeah, right.
And we came to a conclusion. Well, I came to a conclusion.
What's your conclusion?
My conclusion is that, so what we were doing was we were trying to satisfy a request from one of our students, Tiffany, about sort of doing a podcast for people who are brand new to homeopathy. And for whatever reason, it just became
I'm
this.
no good at that. I'm no good at talking the basic introduction stuff. You're better at it.
I don't know. I mean, it just didn't make, it was like, it's not our jam. There are so many people who are doing such a good job at
Yeah.
So y'all, if you're good at that, do it.
Absolutely.
Don't leave it to us. We really, and in fact, Courtney, who produces our podcast, she was like, yeah, no, about the last one. And Al said, oh, I'm sure it was fine. And I said, when we finished, I said, no. Anyway. So I got coffee.
Yeah, well done. That looks good.
It's really good. If you can, I don't know if you can see.
This is the difference between the two of us.
This is
la-di-da.
The only thing that I really hold on to of being American is how I like my coffee. Although this isn't standard American coffee.
Can I also mention another debacle that I've just discovered? Because this time last week, we had a distressing event in the garden where our kittens got themselves a squirrel.
Ate a squirrel.
Ate it all.
Yeah.
Leaving only two parts.
The tail
and the very end of the head with the eyes open.
And yesterday another cat.
I just found another one.
The third one?
It's yesterday's. They're still working on it. Yeah.
I mean, I know that there are people that eat squirrel, like no judgment, but there's something about a cat in the yard eating the entire creature. And then
coming in for kibble.
I don't want, can you have any dessert? Can I have some wine with that? Anyway, all right.
I'm sorry, I just had to mention that. I want to talk about ethics.
It was my idea. I'm glad you agreed.
Well,
you said, what do you want to talk about? And I said, ethics.
Well, I want to talk about that.
Okay. Right.
Don't you know that that's the secret to speaking to men?
Right. Make it all seem like it was their idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a tip, folks. And if you don't know that one, then learn it real quick because it's a winner.
You know what? I'll give you a winner. Homeopathy as a field that is like 85% women. And it's an easier road for men.
No fight there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Generally, get on a high horse about this. I remember, actually, just one little sidecar. When I was teaching in London, excuse me, and everybody was complaining about that, the sort of male domination of the field, all the women that I worked with. And I was like, I don't know. Everything is fine. But I realized that it's different, on the lecture circuit and in terms of, how many times have we had a situation? Remember when we were in China, we were presenting in China, and they would put you up on the stage for things and ask me to sit down. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And then it was just sort of, it was very, especially since it was anyway, it doesn't really matter, but it's a funny odd thing. Why are we talking about that?
Well, I don't know. I mentioned ethics, and you just went to
second. It was my idea,
which actually, by definition, has nothing to do with ethics, because ethics is all about, by definition, different from morals. But ethics is all about what ought I do, and I think one of the most amazing things in practice, but definitely and I suppose we're going to be talking about ethics and research. Really,
that is
what is the right thing to do in this circumstance. What should I do?
Well, and also, so let's give some transparency as to why this came up, is that, so when you are conducting research in homeopathy in anything, you need ethics approval. And we get our ethics approval for the research office through the Canadian College of Naturopathy.
Naturopathic medicine.
Naturopathic medicine.
CCNM.
CCNM. And so we submitted a proposal. Why don't you, since you actually do
Yeah,
this part,
what has got us thinking about that? I mean, and then I'll give you some background. What got us thinking about it is because we actually sent a letter, an email, because prior to submitting an ethics proposal, what we've done is we're halfway through a research task that we actually do have ethics approval for from a previous application.
Yeah.
And some of you might even have heard us talk about it. It really is about, let's find out from intake forms who's coming to homeopathy and what can we find out through those intake forms about our clients. And we've done it through looking at the case series of 300 cases at the AHE Chronic Clinic.
Yeah.
All right, simple as that. And then, obviously, well, that's one clinic. So, and while that's interesting, that's not either comparing our findings against anything else, or it's not a broad sample.
Right.
So we wrote a letter, and the letter said, our understanding of secondary, it's a research term, of secondary analysis is that for other participants to contribute intake forms, de-identified, so contributing de-identified data that's been gathered from an intake form from a client, that we don't need an extra ethics approval for that. And if I explained it right?
I think it's still a little complicated. And I think it's really helpful because if some people are new to research, I'm like at the halfway point. Like you're deep in the weeds, you kind of take care of all the stuff.
Yeah.
Then there are people for whom it's really new. And I sit in the middle and I'm struggling.
Okay. So in other words, we're halfway through a project. We want to expand the project.
Yeah.
And we want to get homeopaths all over North America, wherever, to contribute de-identified intake forms.
So let's talk about that for a second.
All right.
So let's get the terminology down. So one of the things that's really important is that you can't figure out who the person is, whose medical or health information you're looking at, really simply.
Right.
So,
even with the Rosetta Stone, actually,
Yep.
with the unfortunately, it means the homeopath's got to do a tiny bit of work, but they've got to black out the name,
right.
Or chop off the top of the form, and so all that's coming to us is a male-bodied 56-year-old from blah blah.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the intake form.
The intake form. And then there's also double de-identification, which is where there is the creation of a numerical system. So that, right?
Yeah.
And that's considered the standard in human subjects research. Now, can I say one of the things I was surprised about is that, and we're going to talk about sort of the course that researchers do, and I had to do the course. What is it called? The course.
Well, it's a standard course in basic research ethics.
Yeah, and I had to do it as part of my degree at Johns Hopkins. Everybody had to do it, even though I was basically getting a history degree. We still had to take this course. And at first I thought, why are they asking us to do this? And then I realized, wow, it's super important. I learned so much in doing that. Anyway, but in the idea is that anyone who is inquiring about another person's health or well-being, despite the fact that they might not be laying hands on them or having a clinical trial, needs to have knowledge of ethics.
Well, yeah, the answer is yes. I would completely agree. But can we just finish off this introductory story?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that people understood the de-identification, because it's not just like I've got your blood or your, whatever your outputs are,
your DNA,
but rather all I have is your data. And even that requires this ethics approval for a variety of reasons that we're going to talk about. But
and that's essentially what the chair of the committee wrote back and said, look, our interpretation is different in this very interesting question, like acknowledging that de-identified data is different from,
getting somebody's blood.
Yeah. And so said, well, that's totally fine. Participants, if they want to participate in this particular piece of research, need to do this, 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 and this.
Right.
And that was a real surprise. A surprise. Firstly, it was a bit of a surprise, and then, like your response, actually, wait, hang on just a moment. We're not just talking here. We're not just having an opinion about, what's going on. We're
Right.
actually conducting research.
Yep.
And research, it's a thing. And it's not opinion, and it's not expert opinion. It is asking a question and then applying a rigorous method to determine an answer to that question, that hypothesis.
And anyone who participates in the gathering, the conducting, the gathering, the calculating, anyone who touches it needs to be trained in the finer points of the ethics of conducting research.
Yeah, and it's not a ginormous course. It's not a 2-week course. It's a 2-hour course. So, at the end of the the one that
The one that I had to do was longer.
No, you had to do a longer one. Yeah. So, this has got us thinking about this. Can I go on a journey and just tell you my own journey through ethics and research and stuff? So,
I think our light just changed. Does that matter?
don't think so.
No. Okay.
Doesn't matter. So,
did you notice it, or am I freaking out?
I think it's you.
Okay. Anyway, please proceed.
So my introduction to research goes back to my university days. So I'm in my 20s.
Right. You're
and
researching whales and.
I'm spending a long winter. Actually, I spent a long winter doing this.
That's
watching
the universal sign for microfiche.
Microfiche. In a booth by myself for a very, very long time. Anyway, and I did an honors thesis, and I did not need ethics approval because I'm looking at whaling logs from 150 years ago.
Sure.
All right. Fast forward, I'm in 1998 and I've arrived in Australia, and I get a call and somebody says, you're a homeopath. We've got a course that needs teaching. Can you please write a course on provings and proving methodology and conduct a proving? And I went, hell yeah. And did it, ran the first year, the second year, the third year, the fourth year. And then at some point, and it was in the early 2000s, a student participant said, I'm not doing that. In the middle of the class, I was really shocked because I can talk a good talk and everybody gets excited about being involved in a proving.
The shamanic part of homeopathy.
And I said, why is that? She said, because it's not ethical. And at the time, I must admit, I was in the middle of a class and I went, okay, good. We'll come back to it.
Right.
It didn't dislodge the class in any way or, upset the class in any way. But I went back to it and I had a long conversation with her. And she said, my background is in the health field. I'm fascinated by research and homeopathy, and what you've just done is coercion. And it was the first time I heard the word.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, oh, hang on just a minute. Because what I was doing is letting people know how exciting it is, but not letting anybody know about the risk-benefit ratio,
right,
which I've subsequently learned. I've also, in that course of that time, doing a lot of provings. I mean, over the years, say 23, 24 provings, I saw a whole lot of really interesting things that just I noticed and then ignored. Like, for example,
I know what you're going to
the fact that, the mum that's the homeopathic student that forgets to feed the kid because they're having, the homeopathy student that's doing a proving, forgets to feed child number 2 because they're writing in their journal or they're having a nice time or something. Or they're sick.
And then they miss work. And then it affects their livelihood.
Or they drive really unsafely.
Or they kind of get naughty with somebody they shouldn't have because part of the, that's where I thought you were going, that proving.
No. You're talking about box jellyfish.
Box jellyfish.
There was a whole lot of,
naughtiness.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's say some compulsive sexual antics went on. And so it occurred to me, in addition to all of that, long story short, is there's a whole lot of people that are involved that did not consent to participating in a study.
And sometimes people consent, but the consent is because we've talked about this. I was working for a school that wanted a group of my students to participate in approving and made it sound so exciting. And it was, sort of April when the school year was to end in May or June or something. And, these folks might have been in a situation where the completion of their studies might have been impacted.
Well, I mean, there is that. And then there's also, because back in the 90s, there were these seminar provings. Take a remedy. The effect will be gone by tomorrow. Right. It'll be interesting.
We'll talk about
There's all about that. I mean, that's different to my own experience. But when it comes to the reality that even the personal experiment or the group experiment with approving is on a human being.
Yeah, totally.
And therefore, as I learned, I'm going to say mid-career, and it was an O.
We talked about this a few podcasts ago.
I don't know, we probably did, and I took
a slightly different context.
Yeah. And then look, a couple of other things. Did my master's, and did need to submit an ethics application for the study that I did, my thesis. And then I took myself off to Germany, and I did a research course with Klaus Lind, who did the that great meta-analysis, and then Claudia Witt in Potsdam, and at least half the course would have been focused just on ethics and research, as well as this is a pragmatic study. Why is it less important than a blah blah study? All of that stuff. In the weeds with the research, but
totally.
But ethics came to the fore. And then in my doctoral study, same thing again. I absolutely needed to submit an ethics application, almost, and never predicting what's going to happen in a study, but articulating to somebody who does not care about your study, who is a member of the community or a team, an ethics board, what is the risk to the participant? And going back to provings, that's the difference these days. That's why I don't do provings anymore. And I have actually conducted provings that have had ethics board, IRB or REC, ethics approval.
And you said to me, no more provings. And then I kind of did one.
Well, then you kind of did
one more. Just one more.
Just one more.
And
like chocolate, just another corner.
It's really interesting because there's so much that happens. I actually don't even want to get into that part of it, but because I think what I wanted to talk about, provings are sort of the obvious in homeopathy, because there is the human subject who is participating in something that has the potential to alter their well-being for a short or a longer period of time. And because we deal with, energy medicine, and sorry for people who are sort of new-ish to homeopathy and the woo-woo part is a little bit weird, put your hands over your ears and go to a happy place. But people who are even adjacent, the supervisors, can have symptoms. The placebo provers, now obviously that information is anecdotal and should not be considered in the actual meat of the proving, but it does tell us that that anyone who's involved in that sort of energetic experiment has the potential to express symptomology, right?
Yep.
So that to me is the obvious part. I had a moment though about what we learned we need additional ethics approval on, and the ways in which each participant needs to be readied. And that was like right. It was like, pain in the butt. It's something else to do, more than check this box on the form that says, I agree to have my data included in this study, right? But actually that everyone should be trained in this. So
hang on, you're talking about participants as in the original client, but also then
any researcher,
any homeopaths that want to get engaged with practice-based research.
So this is kind of this is a long wind-up to we want to start getting homeopaths trained in ethics. And everyone who's going to be in our PGRN is going to be asked to do this course, which I think it changed me to do it. And I think, of all the study I've done in homeopathy, that really hit. Like, holy macaroni, if we want to take our profession forward, there are things that we need to know about. Yeah. And we'll talk in a minute. Let's talk about Tuskegee and we'll talk about Helsinki and just kind of get those terms like for people to understand. But so part of my my research practicum, my on-site, work at Johns Hopkins, we had a couple of days that were just all about ethics. And it was everything from the ethics of the retrieval of information. I mean, some of the stuff that's not obvious, but then some of the things that we talked about that I'm now starting to see popping up are about sort of the ethics of how we retrospectively deal with things like human remains on display in a museum. Right. So that it's got far-reaching implications and it's kind of a wow. So for example, here in Philadelphia, the Mutter Museum, which is one of my favorite places, is full of medical oddities and peculiarities, which happens to be sort of, in keeping with, right, my weird. They are now having a whole I don't know if it's just a series of talks, if it's just a talk, but there's a whole discussion now about how to appropriately display things that were gathered at a time when nobody really thought about it. At Drexel University, where the archives, the homeopathy archives from the medical college and the Herring archives and so forth, my dear friend and the archivist there, Margaret Graham, she kind of gave me some really helpful information when she was sharing what they're going through. So their collection, they're going back and saying, look, we've got parts of people's, bodies and things. We need to, instead of just storing them in a bag or whatever, they're now, being stored appropriately with the reverence for the fact that this is someone's remains. Yeah.
And it's really important because while homeopathy is being practiced in the 21st century,
yeah,
in a contemporary setting, its origins are 250 years ago.
Right.
And, an example is that Hahnemann and his amazing provings did provings on his kids.
Right.
Used participants that from today's perspective and standards would be a little eyebrow raising.
Totally.
And you're saying the same thing, other eras in medicine dealt with bones and bodies in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to indigenous cultures.
Exactly. Right. I remember when
Big deal.
What is that Body World there?
Yeah.
I just couldn't go see it. Even though I wanted to see, but if you're not familiar with Body World, it's like they sort of took the skin off of bodies so you could see the musculature and everything. And it was in this, I think kind of beautiful or very interesting like settings and things, and it traveled all around the place. But then when I found out that it was from like Chinese prisoners, right? Or
I don't know if that's a rumor, but that's also I've heard that as well. But I don't know that for sure.
It may not be may not be factual, but just thinking about that, right? So all of these things around consent become really interesting. I mentioned the Tuskegee. So the Tuskegee experiment is one of the it's something that's often held up as one of the ways that we learn how not to do things. It's like the example that's held up. And it was basically a study to see if Black bodies experience syphilis differently than white bodies. And so these airmen, did I ever tell you that I lived across the street from a Tuskegee airman? 2 doors down from Lauren Daves. Yeah. He was an amazing man. He would have been in his 80s, late 80s when I met him.
And had been through syphilis.
Yeah.
And come out the end.
And came out the end.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, but that was it's wrong on so many levels. But, one of the things that I think is interesting, because I know that, as we come into the 21st century and we start asking questions about history, and with these questions come like, well, just leave things as they were because people didn't know any better or differently. Like there's so many arguments to be had about the way in which we view history. Like you can't go back and retrofit things to meet whatever your ideals are of the day. And I actually wanted to just shift the conversation because I know for a lot of folks who are interested in, integrative medicine, homeopathy, different alternatives, there was a lot of conversation about the VACCINE during COVID, right? And so, and I spell it because I don't know, because I'm, used to just not really, I mean, anyway, but the conversations and the concerns that people had were, is this fully proven out? Do we understand the new technology, mRNA technology is, blah, 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 blah. And so while I think for some folks, it might be like, ugh, why are you talking about this? Like, that's what people did in the past. But, we learn from the past and then and it confronts us in the present day. So it's not just about how do you store the bones at the Mutter Museum or at Drexel University, but the same sort of conscientious practice spills into, questions about how we deploy new medical interventions. Right.
I love it. I mean, what I've appreciated more and more, and I think it's made me more and more slower, more slowly. I go about things more slowly, and whatever the word is, and I am more conservative in many ways, not all ways, but many ways, because I realize that for the question, the ethical question, what ought one do?
Right.
We meet those questions all the time. Going back to the example you gave of the airmen.
Yeah.
You see, it was even in whenever it was in the 40s, in the 1950s, it was still unknown the exact pathological process if syphilis went unchecked in the human body. And so some smart folks obviously thought, well, let's try it. And with their own internal logic,
right,
went, okay, well, let's do it.
Yeah.
Now,
wait, I would have put this in perspective. The study ended in October of 1972. The study ended.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And do you see how, depending on one's perspective,
right,
you're shining the torch on a question, on a challenge, an issue, something that needs to be solved. You can talk yourself into anything.
Oh, absolutely.
But I can just see that ethically unjustifiable.
Yeah.
Wow.
The results were disproportionately meager compared with the known risks to human subjects involved.
And so, sometimes we're in this situation. It's always
syphilis. I mean, that is just.
Yeah. It's always. It's such an interesting perspective between a research perspective and a public health perspective, because if you are a public health person and you've got a potential intervention with a challenge, an epidemic condition, or just a set of clients you want to explore something, then you want to make sure that everyone gets the benefit. Nope, look at that, thumb up. You want to make sure that everyone gets the benefit. That's the public health perspective. But the research perspective is, no, you don't. You need a control. And so you always want a part of a sample, a part of a group, to not have the intervention.
Right.
And your heart is going, if you're a clinician, are you kidding?
It's like,
and your brain is going, no, let's have a control.
Right. Like Burnett in the fever hospital. The great homeopathy studies. So James Compton Burnett was doing an experiment on aconite. Was it aconite or belladonna? It was aconite. Yeah, aconite in children's fevers at the fever hospital in the UK. And so on one side of the ward, the kids got aconite. The other side of the ward, they didn't. And so he goes home for the weekend. He comes back and the fever ward is empty. And he says to the nurse, what happened? And she says, well, I gave aconite to all the rest of the kids. Well, you can't do that. And, I saw how well it worked. And she cleared out the fever ward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It is.
Questionable ethics. But you also mentioned a couple of other things. I mean, there's been two big meetings and one important report which has contributed to where we are to get to an ethical framework these days. The Nuremberg statement was the establishing the basics of ethical principles after the Second World War, and after some medicine had been conducted during the war, which again, was unbelievably less than ethical. And so establishing those four principles.
I always forget them.
Yeah. So equity. Beneficence, non-maleficence, and autonomy.
Wow.
Actually, the autonomy is the first one, and then justice. So equity is the fourth.
Look at you go. We're pulling that right out. I would have had to had to look it up. That's why you're the expert on this one.
And then the Helsinki Declaration
Yeah.
that you mentioned as well, where they fine-tuned some bits. And then there's another report, an important report, the Belmont Report, which is much more recent.
Well, Helsinki was 1964.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think this isn't going to be a long podcast. It was just one to really bring up this point that our research office is going to be sort of rethinking the ways in which we ask everyone who's involved to be a part of ethics in all of our research.
Can I tell you about my morning?
Yeah, why not?
So what I did is those charts when if you want to buy a piece of software and you get the free one and it goes tick, 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 and it gives you 3 little, things, and you can do some basic stuff with it. Or if you get the second option, you pay a bit, $9.99 a month. Yeah. And then if you really want the
$10,000,
the plus, the plus program, then there's a whole line of ticks down the side. So what I was doing is saying that PGRN members, if they want to be a member, then all you need to do is read the newsletter that comes out and participate in surveys. Right. And you can come to some other meetings, especially around, some publications that we're doing. But if you want to contribute your data, then what I was doing this morning is laying out those requirements. Yeah. And, what we're going to be doing is providing some class time, some session time over the summer. And where in a very gentle way, I explain some basics and then encourage folks to adjust their disclaimer.
I'm so glad that you did it. We were talking about it. I didn't know you were actually gonna.
Yeah, no, I spent the morning doing that. So I worked out because we don't want to impose on anybody. No. And seriously.
So we're just gonna do it together.
Yeah. And so, but those people that do want to contribute data, then the requirements are going to be clear and they're not going to be onerous. But part of it would be participating in a brief ethics course, which is free. And
you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, I agree. It's what do you think? Because you said before that it's changed your perspective and your way about doing things. In what way?
So I'll tell you, it wasn't so much just because I did the course and was exposed to it. It was I had to do projects around it, and the project that and we had to choose sort of an ethically fraught population to work with and write a research proposal that really looked into all the corners of what could go wrong.
Right.
And I chose to do something on Down syndrome. I grew up with my mom's younger brother who had Down syndrome. He was like a brother to me and, lived with him my whole life. And, it was really interesting to think about. So he was born in 1945. And so I was shocked when I did, some research into just basics around Down syndrome, that up until the 1970s, babies who were born with Down syndrome there's a simple surgery. I actually closed my computer. I wanted to have the name of the surgery and I forgot I closed it. Anyway, that is basically, it has to do with some esophageal issues that Down syndrome babies can be born with, and they would just leave them in the corner of a room to die. It was just shocking. And C. Everett Koop, who became the Surgeon General of the United States, pioneered this surgery and fought for delivering the surgery to babies with Down syndrome. And then there were all of these advances in sort of early intervention, unlike when my uncle was born, which was, my grandmother hid him because there was mandatory institutionalization happening, right?
Wow.
And people were, then I started, I did a deep dive and I'm learning about these people who didn't even know that they had siblings that had Down syndrome who had been in institutions. They had never met them. It was just sort of how, right? And in the 70s, this was going on until the 1970s. And then there was this like rapid fire set of interventions of these people can live really rich and full lives. But there are some things like, people with Down syndrome have, often have low muscle tone. So they're going to need physiological interventions and blah, 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 right? Okay, so let's say that all of this is happening and people are, reaching their highest potential. Well, then you come to the point, what happens with procreation? What are the ethics around people with, perceived disabilities, procreate? I mean, it was and just sort of sitting within the soup of ethics around asking questions like, well, who makes these decisions? Right? How does something go from in the 60s, there's, mass institutionalization to the 80s? One of my high school friends, their family had a child with Down syndrome, and she's like amazing, right? It's like totally different in the span of 20 years.
Not even a generation.
Not even a generation. And so thinking about homeopathy, just to kind of tie this around, the whole time I'm going through this, learning about ethics, I'm thinking, well, what are all of the things where, as we become more in the system, if we want our, medicine to get its way back into, if not the mainstream, I mean, it should be in the mainstream, right? For all the reasons we talk about. What are all the things everybody should have in their medicine chest and so on and so forth, right? But let's say that we get homeopathy back into the hospitals, into the emergency rooms, into whatever. What are the steps that we're going to have to take? What are the ways that we who are, having conversations about the future of homeopathy need to be prepared for what might happen, right? So like at AHE, we say we're raising up the next generation of leadership. Well, that means that we need to prepare people, not just to be research ready or how to have their practice be research ready, but what are the ethical things that we might face? If we start getting our, homeopathy gets into a medical office and we want to start collecting data, well, people need to understand about human subject research protocols, double de-identification of data, and all the things around ethics and coercion and so on and so forth. And I think that I don't want to say that we've been blindly going around it because everybody in our office has had to do this, but I'll speak for myself. I never thought about the larger implications of everybody that we are asking to participate in the PGRN. Well, what if somebody's brand new to this? I think that we have a responsibility to say, look, these are the guidelines around ethics. Everybody should understand what an IRB is and who sits on an IRB and where do homeopaths go to get their ethical, stamp of you may proceed. Yeah. So that's why I was moved to give you the idea for us to talk about ethics today.
Well, you're talking about my idea.
Your idea. Well,
Yeah.
I'm saying that's why I was moved to give you the impetus for you to come up with a great idea for what we should do.
I love it.
Too. I think we should keep talking about it.
Sure, for sure.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
I have a client in 9 minutes.
Really?
I do.
I got
I was trying-
aces.
Good. All right. I was trying to give you the nonverbal cue, but I could.
No, you got to be clearer.
I got to be clear. I've tried showing you.
Well, I like the way you wrap that up, and I'm just trying to work out if there's a pithy way that I can, add my piece, and I don't think I can.
Add your piece.
Uh-huh.
I love it.
All right. Anyway, ethics and research, folks. You want to participate in the brave new world. You want to actually contribute research outputs and contribute to that which has to be done.
It has
to keep us where we are and moving forward.
And don't feel overwhelmed by it because we'll do the heavy lifting for you. That's what our
we'll show you how to do it.
We'll show you how to do it. We'll set up the course. You just need to show up and do the thing, and you'll be glad you did.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
I can't wait to talk more about it. All right.
See you, folks.
See you, peeps.
Take care. Bye.
Home Foundation is hard at work. The practitioner-generated research network is like nothing the homeopathy community has seen before. Through the PGRN, we will be able to bring groundbreaking research to the world that will help protect homeopathy for generations to come. Learn more about how you can contribute to research at homefoundation.org. That's home, HOHM, foundation.org.